Okay, this is the start of scratch build number 2 for Jack Jack. That was my timestamp on when I actually started it. I just saw the video, so I'm going off and starting to do my build. I went up and I did my measurements on Google Map. Took them out over here. You can see this is what I'm going to actually be building, is this building here. And there'll be more pictures of this later. I thought I had some, but I didn't. So, got my measurements off of Google Map. And here you can see I'm starting and trying to figure out what I'm going to be doing and how I'm going to do it. The biggest thing that it's going to be to take care of is the transfer item there. And I got to find out what it is. Okay, so there we go. That's my start on today. This is Steve 87. All right, Model Railroaders. This is my first start on my latest build that I'm going to be doing. I'm starting off with some plywood. So the first thing I got to do is cut a bunch of 4x8 sheets of plywood out of this here item. So what we're doing is we are building a primitive, what do you want to call it? A primitive fertilizer transfer shed is actually what it's going to be. And I need a whole bunch of 8x4, 4x8 sheets of plywood. So we're going to cut those first. All right, so what I'm going to do is cut 4x8 sheets of plywood for this building. I'll tell you a little bit more about that. First thing we want to do, I'm cutting them out of balsa wood. So the first thing we want to do is make sure that we have a square edge. And that's what I'm doing right now. I'm taking my little tiny square, making sure that it's flush against the side and cutting it square at the edge. So now I know that I'm going to have square cuts. It was at this point in time I didn't follow Vinny's advice, and so I had to go change out my blade to realize, because my other blade was very dull, so I wanted to start with a new clean blade. So now I got the new clean blade in, and what I'm doing is I'm going to cut out strips of 8 feet long strips. Okay, and there's a reason why I'm doing it in 8 feet long. So the building that I'm building is actually 60 feet long, and it's 16 feet high. So when you divide that out, it comes out to an even number of 4x8 panels. And it's a lot easier to duplicate plywood panels using actual wood. And since they're just slapped on as panels and they're outside exterior panels, I want them to look like 4x8 sheets. So that's why we're cutting all these up. So I cut out several sheets so that I could go ahead and have my plywood for my sides done. And then we'll go on to step 2. Okay, so our next step is to cut the 8-foot pieces, 8-foot wide pieces, into 4-foot pieces. So here I am setting up my chopper so that it's 4 feet wide. Once I get them all 4 feet wide, then I use the chopper to go ahead and cut them. So the reason I didn't use the chopper for the 8 feet is because obviously you can see it's not far enough, but it's more than enough to cut the 4s. So now I've got nice little easy 4-foot by 8-foot pieces of plywood. So see, scale 8 feet by 4 feet. And now I've got a bunch of these I've got to cut out. 2 rows for 60 feet at 4 feet a piece. I forget how many I actually did. And I had to do 2 sides of the building. So that's one of the other things. It's only 2 sides, so it's kind of cool. Okay, so now I'm moving on to the next step, which is making 2 by 12 cross beams. So I did this by cutting that same balsa wood into 8-foot wide strip, or 16-foot wide strips, sorry, and then using the chopper to cut them into 12-inch boards. Okay, so I'm doing this because Jack didn't want us to use any regular dimensional lumber. So in order to get the dimensional lumber, I had to use some balsa wood. This, I believe, is like 1/32 thick. And so I'm using the chopper. This is kind of where I wish I would have had the duplicator, because if I had the duplicator, it might have been nice because it has a longer area, because you can see here I'm having to flip it over, which makes these a little not straight, but that's okay. We can always sand them off later. So again, these are the cross beams that are going to be used in the roof section. And you can see I had to cut a bunch of these. All right, there is my stack of 12 by 1s. This is my plywood that I need for everything. So that's those biggest portions. All right. My 16-foot 4x6s are a bunch of matchsticks, which is what I'm going to use for those. And then for the cement pillars, I've got some 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch balsa strip, because these concrete pillars are actually really important, because these go on the concrete pillars. And then the pillars make up what everything sits on. So, back to my potos. Now, the one thing that I will use, I am going to use 2x4s from Kaplan Lumber, because there's no way I can duplicate the 2x4s without destroying everything. So, there's my disclosure. Those are not out of balsa wood. They're prepared by somebody. So my 2x12s were not. You guys saw me do those. Now I got my matchsticks for my posts. Okay, so once again, I have to cut up all these matchsticks that I'm using as my 4x6s or whatever size, my posts basically. So they're all going to be set at 16. At first I thought I was going to do a 16-foot cut and an 18-foot cup, but then when I went and looked at the drawings a little bit better, not the drawings, my pictures I actually made, it's actually the posts that are, not the posts, but the pylons, those concrete pylons that are at different heights. So here I am once again setting up my chopper to get the 16-foot cuts. And the other thing that's going to happen is there's going to be little leftover pieces. Well, I need those pieces to put in between the beams, the 2x12 beams that are going to make up the roof. So the way that this works, if you look at the building, you have the post. On either side of the post, you have the cross beam attached to it. So you've got 2 cross beams, 2 2x12s on either side of each beam. And then in between, to make the spacers correct, they used some other lumber to hold those apart and also keep them for strength. So it's good to keep some of your scraps and understand what you're doing. So that's my next thing. So now that I've got the posts cut, we go on to the next. The 2x4s I didn't start cutting up until later. Because I'm going to need a lot of those cut. So we're going to do that next. So that's where we're at. We'll move on to the next spot now. Okay, so now comes the next part. I have to make roof sections. So at first I was going to use some easy roof sections, but then part of the rules were to have everything scratch built. So I had to figure out how to make roof sections that were corrugated roofs. So I first was going to use some stirring sticks, but the little straws that you use as stirring sticks and all that. But then I figured out that I'd be crushing them every time I had to do the burnishing. So what I came up with is to use my micro brushes. So here I'm attaching all the micro brushes together because they're nice and round, but they're also solid. So by them being solid, when I go to burnish the aluminum foil, there's not going to be any crushing, and the roof will come out a lot better than what it should look at if I was crushing with the straws. So I came up, taped them all together, flipped them over, and of course I realized that I could have probably stopped, not had to do this step by just putting the tape on both ends. But that's okay. So now I've got these taped down to my top. And then what I'm going to start doing is burnishing a bunch of aluminum foil. Now the aluminum foil that I use is not the normal aluminum foil that you use in your kitchen. It's the heavy duty aluminum foil. Okay, the heavy duty holds up a lot better. So then you see all I'm doing is actually taking a paintbrush and pulling it along in one direction on this aluminum foil. And then once that's done, I now have a corrugated roof section. And then I can go ahead and cut that out. Okay. And then you can see that it's corrugated. And then I just keep going. And I keep doing the smaller sections like this because that way I know that the roof actually has good continuity throughout it. Okay. And you just need a pair of scissors to cut the aluminum foil. So it makes it easier. All right, so there's a pile of roofing. So those are all of the basics that I need for this build. So the next thing I need to do is make a little jig. And once I have the little jig, I should be able to produce the building. Now, the one thing that's funny about this is the building will be produced at two different heights at a 2-foot height difference, which means that the pillars have to be different heights, which is what I saw in the picture too. So we will go ahead and cut the pillars real quick. Where's my big pieces? Okay, so now there's several ways to cut these pillars. So what I decided was, in looking at the pictures, the beams were the same size, but the pillars were different. So I am going to use the chopper to actually cut these 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch posts, which is not necessarily normal and might not be the best way to do it. Okay, but this is the way that I chose to do it. You could do it in a miter box, you could do it with a saw cut, freehand. I didn't really care. I was just figuring I could go ahead and cut through these a little bit. They're balsa wood. And what happened was I had to do a 4 cut. So the first ones that I did were at 5.5 feet long, I believe. 5.5, yeah, I think they're 5 to 5.5 feet long. Okay, so, and I had to make 6 of them because there's since it's 60 feet, there's one, actually I made 6 of them, but I only needed 5. I needed 6 of them because there's 5 pillars kind of total. So there's 1 on each end and then 4 in the middle is the way the pillar count goes when you look at 60 feet. Because basically there was 3 pieces of plywood between each post. So that gave me the number of posts that I did. So I cut the posts up at the correct lengths. This took me a while, so you can see here that every time I had to cut 4 cuts on each one of these, so that's 6 times 4 cuts. Now I'm going ahead and resetting this to the 3 feet. So like I said, when they did this, when they did the building, you could tell they didn't want to cut up lumber if they didn't need to. So what they did was they poured the concrete. They poured 1 set of forms for the pillars at 3 feet and the other one at 5 feet. And that gave them a 2-foot differential so that they had a sloped roof. So that's what I'm doing. So once I get all of these cut, we're going to go ahead and sand them up at angles that they look like actual pillars. Okay, so again, I had to do 6 of these. You can see that the blade, if you take the chopper blade and go too far down with it, it tends to get stuck. So if you just do some light cuts with it and then keep going, and it eventually goes around and then breaks. So that's how we've got that set up for now. Okay, so this concludes the pillars and all of my material that I need to build my building.